Thank you for coming. This is a wonderful turnout. This Bear Talk is presented by the Westboro Community Land Trust. I just want to say a couple things about the Land Trust. We're an organization in Westboro, privately funded by members and that sort of thing. It's not part of the government of the town. We do land protection. There are 60 miles of trails in town, which some of which we built, some of which were there, and which we maintain. We put on educational programs such as this one. Anyone would like to join or donate, you can find that in the Westboro Community Land Trust website. Let's see what else here. We've protected 206 acres in Westboro and sort of steward another 300. Some of you may know Gilmore Pond. That's one of our properties, which is open to the public, and it's a lovely little pond with a short walk around it. We also have some upcoming events which I'd like to mention.
It's great to see so many of you here. Hopefully all of you have not encountered bears yet. We have programs every month, and they're free, and they are a great way to get to know the woods in Westboro. And again, Gilmore Pond is our newest, biggest project. It's an all-accessible people's trail, so it's built so that there are lines around the pond, and people who are blind, there will be Braille signs, and those we will have a QR code, and people who are deaf and various people who have different challenges will be able to stop at different stations to learn about the birds and the wildflowers and the animals. So that's what's going on right now, and a lot of us are involved in that particular project right now. What's coming up, however, is the biggest program we have, which is a live animal program. So if you have children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, it will be on March 14th, Saturday. There are two shows, one at 9 o'clock and one at 11 o'clock at the KFC, as it is every year. And we advise you to get there early. This year it is Meet the Raptors, so it will be wonderful owls and various other raptors that the children can meet up close and be amazed by. So that is Saturday, March 14th. And coming up in April, I hope all of you will get involved with our cleanup week. And you can sign up as an individual to clean up a particular area, either online, or sign up with a group, a club, or people who you work with, and you just leave the bags at the side of the road on the week of April 11 through 18. So that's a major community project that the Land Trust gets involved in, and we hope you will too. And the other particular programs in May, there's invasive plants, and that will identify invasive plants, what are they and what we can do about them. And on June 8th will be the annual meeting of the Land Trust. So we hope that all of you will again come out to hear all about nature in Westboro, and to walk the trails. You maybe recognize each other from meeting each other on the trails as well. So we're delighted you're here today. And Anne's going to introduce.
Okay, well, now, stand in the light. The main event is Meghan Crawford, wildlife biologist, and actually the community engagement biologist working for Massachusetts Fish and Wildlife. She works up at the headquarters. It's here in town. She's got 10 years of teaching experience at zoos, museums, and environmental centers. And I guess it's her turn.
So I have this fancy microphone. I just want to ask my friends in the back, can you hear me okay? Okay, excellent. And how about my friends in the front? Am I too loud for you? Okay. All right, super. You can always give me maybe a point up or a point down if anything changes at any point. If you're giving me a thumbs up, then I'll just think I'm doing a good job. So I'll take that too. But as mentioned, my name is Meghan Crawford, and I am the Community Engagement Biologist with the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, or Mass Wildlife. And as Annie mentioned, I work just up the road out of our headquarters on Rabbit Hill Road. So I know some of you have mentioned that you've had a chance to stop by the building. If you haven't, we're open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. if you ever want to just come and take a peek. But thank you all for coming out to this bookstore. I've never been to this bookstore before, so I'm also going to mosey around afterwards to join me for this presentation all about living with black bears here in Massachusetts, which I think we've turned our lights down in the front. Do people feel like they can see these slides okay? No? Okay. Let's see. All right. Better. But it's okay if you take a snooze. I promise I'll forgive you because we're in the dark. But hopefully I'll be entertaining enough where we'll all stay awake. So let's hop on into it. I will mention that this presentation, I think it's going to be around 35-40 minutes long, and then we'll pause for some questions. We can do questions in a group, and then we'll kind of fizzle it down to if you want to ask one-on-one questions at the end, that's great too. Who's heard of Mass Wildlife before? Yeah, nice. Okay, super duper hands. Love to just remind people of who we are, what our mission is, and how we're maybe different than other similar state agencies like the Conservation or the Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR. So Mass Wildlife, we're the ones that are responsible for the conservation of freshwater fish and wildlife across the state. And that includes endangered, threatened, rare animals and plants, but it also includes common and abundant wildlife like black bears that we're going to be talking about today. And on top of that, we also work to restore, protect, and manage land for wildlife to thrive and for people to enjoy it. So how about raise your hand if you've ever been to a wildlife management area, or WMA. Love it. Yep, there's one here in Westboro as well, right next to our office. So we manage and oversee about, I think it's now 239,000 acres of land across the state that again is open to the public to enjoy it and for wildlife to thrive. On some of that land we do active management on to improve the habitat to better support that wildlife. Oh, today, hopefully we won't be going into the night. Today, these are the things we're going to learn about. We're going to learn about black bear biology and research that happens here in the state, that's happening right now. We're going to review tips for coexisting with bears, as I'm sure some of you may be wondering about. And then, like I said, Q&A at the end. So let's introduce the star of our show here, other than myself, the American black bear. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a black bear here in Massachusetts, anywhere in Mass. Okay, how about hands down? How about raise your hand if you've seen one in Westboro? Okay, no hands. I'm not surprised by that, and we'll get into why. But just fielding it out. Seems like a lot of people have, in fact, seen a black bear themselves, but in case you're new to this animal, this is what they look like. This is the only bear found in eastern Massachusetts, the only bear found here in eastern United States, only bear found here in Massachusetts. When we're talking about adult males, we refer to them as boars. They are solitary. They live most of their lives on their own, and they average between 350 and 500 pounds. So big, muscular animals. And then we have adult females. We refer to them as sows, and they weigh quite a bit less, but still a pretty large animal, somewhere between 140 and 300 pounds. Females bears in general tend to be larger when they live in more suburban areas where they're munching on food in people's backyards. And they tend to be a little bit smaller when they're relying on natural food sources, which is what we prefer. But once they hit reproductive age, adult females, they are almost always taking care of young. So they are almost never by themselves once they are at that reproductive age. So what I like to do is kind of walk us through black bear diet and habitats, where you might see them at any given point of the year, because their habitat use is really tied to the food that's available during the different seasons. So let's imagine ourselves, we'll like fast forward for a couple months here, and imagine ourselves in spring, which sounds lovely right about now, and imagine, what is a bear doing in spring? What are they eating? So what they're looking for is grasses, sedges, roots. They're looking for that first greenery that's kind of popping up, because bears, they are omnivores. They eat plant material and meat material, but really like 90% of their diet is plant material. They're primarily herbivores, so they're looking for plants. And they're really relying in spring on that skunk cabbage. Has anybody seen skunk cabbage around that you can idea? This picture's tough to see, but it's like the first stuff that you'll see on the ground in spring. Really, really neat plant. It's in wetlands, and bears are looking for it in the spring, because it's like the first thing that's out there. So bears are spending a lot of time in wetlands during the spring. They're also eating like leftover nuts that were from the previous fall. Carrion, which is just like whatever dead stuff they may come across. They are scavengers too. They will opportunistically hunt and eat deer fawns. So fawns will start to drop at the end of May. They're pretty defenseless for their first couple weeks. So bears and other wildlife will take advantage of that. Bears don't like to work too hard for their food. So once the fawns get beyond that, they're not really chasing them down. And then, of course, year-round, they're looking at human-associated foods. And I'm going to be talking a lot about those today. Those are the foods that we as people provide in our backyards, associated with us. Number one being bird feeders. And we're going to talk a lot about those today. But let's go on over to summer. In the summertime, the food is changing a little bit. Habitats are changing a little bit. So they'll eat all that stuff that I talked about before, but now they're moving on to insects are going to be out there too. So ants, bee and wasp nests, beetle larvae, they'll be taking advantage of those. They're looking at the soft mass that's starting to grow, so berries, cherries, grapes, absolutely, blueberries, and they are starting to take advantage of agricultural crops that are really more available, which can be a real source of conflict between people and bears, as farmers are relying on those crops for their livelihoods, and bears are coming along and can do a lot of damage. But corn and apples for sure. And so for summer habitats, you got forests, logged areas, still those wetlands, and fields and orchards. And I know sometimes people pause and go, logged areas, really? A bear wants to spend time there? But you think about all those downed logs, that opens up a lot of ground space for them to dig in for things in the ground, like larvae, like nests, those beetles or bugs that might be in those downed logs too. So lots of food there for them. Then if we go on over to the late summer and fall diet, this is where bears start to enter what we call hyperphagia, which really just means they're trying to eat as much as possible. They are just chowing. Bears are thinking about food like all the time year round, but especially during this time, because they need to gain as much weight as they can during this time to really kind of build up those reserves for the winter. So what are they eating? Still corn and apples, snacking. They'll start eating those nuts that are starting to be produced that fall, so acorns, hickory nuts, beech nuts, and then deer carcasses that might be around as a result of the hunting season, or gut piles that might be out there, or deer carcasses on the side of roadways, that like deer vehicle collisions peak during the fall months, so they'll be taking advantage of that too as scavengers. And so the fall habitats, upland forests and fields and orchards are where you can commonly find them. And then we go to winter. And so, raise your hand if you've ever heard that black bears hibernate in wintertime. Yeah, it's close. I would say, so black bears are not true hibernators. True hibernators, they go into this really, really restful state where they're not going to rouse at all. Their body temperature really significantly decreases, I should say. Black bears, their body temp does not decrease quite enough, and they can actually wake up out of that sleep every once in a while. If they hear something outside their den, they can wake up and become alert. And for that reason, they are not true hibernators, but they do den in the wintertime, and they do go into this really, really restful state during the wintertime. And this denning is an adaptation to food shortages. So people often think, well, it's because it's cold, because they're chilly. They're going to go tuck away for the winter like we all wish we could. And that's not necessarily it. It's really related to food sources, because remember, they are plant eaters primarily, and the plants kind of get pretty few and far between in the wintertime. So they're denning as it relates to a shortage of food. And that's important for us to think about, because if we as people are providing foods in our backyards, bears aren't going to get that important trigger, that important reminder to den. And we actually see bears that will skip denning altogether because food remained available because people didn't secure the food sources in their backyard, which really just results in more human-bear conflict, which isn't good for bears, isn't good for people. We want to see them doing their natural thing and denning during this time. However, pregnant bears, which we'll get into this just, I think, in the next slide, will always den because they give birth to their cubs in the den. So there's another reason there for their denning. And so we're going to jump into this because, you know, as you may see bears, maybe not here in Westboro, or yes, here in Westboro, what you see can be described often by what's going on with the adult female, because she kind of drives the behavior that you might observe out on the landscape. And so we're going to focus on an adult female, on a sow, and her 2-year reproductive cycle. And we're going to walk through this together. So imagine, again, we're in mid-May through early July. That is black bear mating season. So it peaks in like mid-June to mid-July, early July. The males and females will come together. The egg will be fertilized. It'll develop a little bit, but that embryo will not implant into the uterus right away. What it will do is it will pause. And this is what we call delayed implantation. So it almost freezes in time. And at that point, that adult female, she's still on her own. She's still in that hyperphagia state. She's chowing, eating as much as she can in that summer and fall time. And then come November 1, she will enter her den. And at that stage, that embryo or the embryos will kind of unfreeze. They'll implant into the uterine lining and they'll start to develop. So this is what we call, again, delayed implantation. It's a really cool reproductive strategy that bears, fishers, other wildlife have. But when they do implant in that November 1, you'll start to have fetal development while that adult female is in her den. And then she will give birth to cubs in her den sometime between mid-January and early February. So that stage kind of just passed, as a lot of those sows will have given birth in their dens. Anywhere between 1 and 4 cubs, more typically 2 to 3. They'll stay in that den together up through about April 1st until they start to mosey on out, looking just like this, and starting to learn how to be an adult bear, how to be a successful bear. So that sow and her cubs will be together. Those cubs will be learning lots of bear lessons all through that spring, all through that summer. The female will skip the mating season of that summer because she can't focus on that. She's got cubs to take care of. She's already busy. So she'll skip that mating season, she'll just focus on those cubs all the way through the fall. Then come November and December, that sow, that adult female, and those cubs are now called yearlings because they've been with her for about a year. So they're called yearlings now. They'll enter the den together again in November and December, so a little bit later than the previous year. They'll stay in that den together and they'll emerge sometime in mid-February to mid-March, a little bit variable there too, so again a little bit earlier than before. Those yearlings might hang with mom for a little bit longer to get those like last minute lessons on how to be a successful bear. But then come May and June, that sow's like, all right, we've been together for a while. I've taught you everything you need to know, I think. It's time for you to go. And so she'll chase him off. So people will also observe that too. And then she'll re-enter the mating season that summer on her own. So you see this 2-year cycle that once that adult female is at reproductive age, she's kind of running the show when it comes to what you might see out there. So this is our current black bear range in Massachusetts, the star here representing Westboro. But for a moment, I want us to go back in time. Let's time travel for a moment and imagine ourselves in pre-European colonization here in Massachusetts, where the entire state was forested and you could find black bears across the entire mainland Massachusetts. But after European colonization, there was a lot of conversion of land from forest into agricultural land, which did not help the bears. And there was incentivized killing, unregulated killing of bears during that time. People's concerns for their livestock and their livelihood, the safety of their families. There was no mass wildlife setting regulations for that at that time. And so our bear population really plummeted. It did not totally disappear. We ended up with a really, really small remnant population up in northwest Massachusetts in the Berkshires, but otherwise bears really weren't found in mass. But since then, we're here in 2026, and this is our current black bear range. And so our bear population has really been able to rebound thanks to regulations set by mass wildlife and thanks to land conservation efforts in the state, as a lot of that agricultural land has shifted back to forested land. So the blue represents our established bear range. That's where we would say bears are common and abundant, where they are reproducing. You'll see cubs in those areas, absolutely. But then we have our expanding range, which is this tannish brown color. That's where our bear population is moving into, Westboro is hanging right in the middle of that. So we are currently, right now, in our established, or our expanding bear range. So our bear population right now is growing in size, and it is moving eastward. So that means in Westboro, it wouldn't be a surprise to hear of bear sightings here, absolutely not, or even cubs here, but we would say that they're still kind of moving into this space. And just because there is no shading in these areas doesn't mean that there are no bear sightings. We've certainly had bear sightings in those other areas too. It's just not quite as established. But as I've mentioned, our population is growing and expanding eastward, and I'm hoping you're out there going, well, how do you know that? Might challenge me a little bit and go, well, are you just making it up? And the answer is no. We got some data to support this claim. And I'm going to talk through how we know what we know about our bear population. One thing that we can look at is black bear harvest. And so we do have a legal regulated bear hunting season in Massachusetts. And when someone successfully harvests a bear, they are required to report it to us. And when they report it to us, they tell us what town it was harvested in. And that can tell us where bears are. And so you can see in 1980, the shading is tough, but just some shading here represents very, very minimal bear harvest in 1980. But then you can see 1990, it's spread out. 2000, it spread out a lot. 2010, even more. The green is showing even more harvest. 2020, you can see it's really making its way eastward. And then 2024, same pattern. So that tells us where bears have been moving into as well. That's one way. Another way is calls from the public. So these are calls to the Massachusetts Environmental Police. They have a dispatch line, 24/7 dispatch line that people call with their questions or concerns about wildlife, including bears. And so these are the calls that took place in that 5-year time period, with the warmer colors representing more calls and the cooler colors representing less calls. So we can see that there's certainly bears in these areas, but also bear sightings in these areas. But keep in mind, like, that doesn't mean that there was a ton of bears in southeast Massachusetts. That means there was probably one bear with a lot of people with a lot of questions, because people are still learning how to live alongside them in places that they're moving into. And so one bear can generate quite a few calls. And then the third way that we learn about our black bear population is through research, is through our collaring study. So since the 1980s, we've been monitoring our black bear population with a collaring study. And so we look at adult female survival rates, we look at causes of mortality for bears, we look at cub production and survival, all since the 1980s. Now, today, we also look at habitat use and movement across the landscape. And we do this by putting radio tracking collars on black bears. And so I have one here that I can pass around. This is a radio tracking collar that was actually at one point on a bear. It hasn't been on a bear in quite some time. But you can take a look at it. You can give it a sniff if you want. You can see that there's like kind of scratch marks along it. That's not the bear like scratching at it. It's just like bears climb trees and go through brush. And that's what's really kind of going along this. So I can pass this around, and just once it reaches the back, you can just put it on that table in the back for me. That would be super. So I'll start it right on up here. So let's talk a little bit more about this collaring study. Again, it's been happening for over 40 years. And so we have radio tracking collars on about 40 female black bears at any time. And about half of them are just radio tracking collars. VHF collars is what we call them, where you have to actually go out like with an antenna and listen for beeps, and where they're stronger is where the bear is. You don't get like continuous data about where they are. You have to actually go out and like collect information. And about half of them have GPS capabilities now, which means that if we want it, every 45 minutes, we can get a ping on where that bear is with its collar. And that can give us really precise information. Also gives us really great information about like habitat use and movement and how they cross roadways or where they're crossing roadways. And we've been able to provide that information to some partners, and I'll show you some of that later. But as a part of this collaring study, in the winter time, between February and March, so right now, our biologists will go out and visit those bear dens, and they'll check on those bears with the collars and give a nice good workup to the adult female, make sure her collar is working properly and fitting properly, and collect lots of really important information. So let's take a look at what these bear dens look like. They could look like a little rock crevice, or rock cave, I should say, but that's not exceptionally common in Massachusetts, so not going to be every bear in a cave like they are in the cartoon. More often than not, they're like on the ground in a really thick brush pile. Sometimes they're just on the ground and it's like a giant bird nest and they've basically just like scooted things together and they're just like out in the elements. Again, they're not hibernating because it's cold. Their body can handle the cold, or I guess they're not in this dormant period because of the cold. So they can just have these dens that are kind of out, not necessarily covered. They can be underneath like fallen trees or underneath like stumps, dug out stumps. They can be up in trees. Those are really challenging dens for our biologists to work out. This is also, I think, just under a stump here. Can't even see the bear. And like I said, we do a little workup. So this is an adult female there that is on a tarp that helps keep her body off the cold ground. So our biologists, they are chemically immobilizing that adult female. They're going out very, very quietly, chemically immobilizing that adult female so that she is safe to handle during these times. It's kind of like going to the dentist and going in for like to get your wisdom teeth taken out. It's like taking just a really good snooze. And so once she's safely immobilized, our biologists, again, are really caring for her and getting the information for our study. We also weigh her. So if you've ever wondered what that might look like if you're in the forest trying to weigh a bear that's just kind of like full weight because she's taking a big snooze, you can see we're kind of wrapping her up in netting there, and that's all getting pulled into a carabiner. Again, that tarp underneath her to keep her body off the cold or wet ground. And then that carabiner is attached to, it will be attached to a scale, and then that scale is attached to a thick log that gets just like found out there that can support her weight, and then she's lifted fully off the ground, takes a little spin, and then is gently put back down onto the tarp. So I think she was about 275 pounds. Pretty good sized bear. And then, of course, if she was pregnant when she entered that den, she gave birth to cubs in that den. And so we don't visit the dens of bears that we believe will have cubs until they are developmentally more mature and like tied to that mom before we go in and get into that den to collect the data. So we don't go in too early, but we will go in, we'll count the cubs, we'll sex them, and we will weigh them. And so that's what that looks like. So you have a little cub here. Very scientific tools being used here. That cub is going into a winter hat that is then being kind of strung up to another scale. And then you can see it. Watch, this is the best. Just slunk right on it. Nice and comfy in there. And that cub was about 4 pounds. I think there was 3 cubs in that den with her. And then I love to point this out too. So I'm not sure if you can see it super well, but the cubs have really long, sharp claws, really like right from the get-go. And that's because their like primary survival strategy when they come out of the den is to climb trees. So if they go out, that's the first thing mom teaches them is get up a tree when I say so, and stay up that tree when I say so, because that's their kind of primary survival piece when they're particularly young. And then once we're all done with this workup, we tuck the mom back into the den nice and safe, and then we tuck those cubs back in, again, nice and safe, usually trying to like attach them to her nipple when ready, and then we cover those dens back up with like lots of greenery to give her some space to just recover, and none the wiser. Again, she'll just kind of go back into that denning, restful state, emerge come April 1st, as usual. But then say we visited that den, and then and she had cubs, and then the next year we visit, we're looking to see does she have yearlings, right? That's going to tell us cub survival after the first year. So imagine we went to that den, maybe she had 3 cubs, the next year we visit her den, she has 2 yearlings. That tells us that 2 of the 3 survived the first year of being a bear. That's really important information for us to collect. But when we go to these yearling dens, is what we call them, we do chemically immobilize all of the bears because at that point they're pretty large in size, again, to keep them safe and us safe. All of the bears get ear tags as a part of our study, so if you ever see a bear with blue ear tags, it means that they were handled as a part of our study at some point. And then maybe the female yearlings might get an expandable collar to account for her growing, and she would be added to our study in that case. And then we can see what she does. And we have cases where we have like 4 or 5 generations of females and their offspring and their offspring and their offspring in certain areas. Very, very neat to see over time. And so what type of information do we get from this study? We've learned that we have a very high adult female survival rate here in Mass. That's not unique to Mass, but it was confirmed through the study. High female survival rate, which is like a primary driver for whether your population is either growing in size, staying the same, or decreasing. And so with a high female survival rate, we know our population is growing in size. We can learn their age at first reproduction, which it used to be closer to 4 years old, but more recently we're seeing adult females start to reproduce at 3 years old, a little bit earlier. We learn about average litter size. Like I said, it's usually somewhere between 1 to 4 cubs. On average, it's 2 to 3. But a sow's first litter tends to be smaller than her subsequent litters. So might have less cubs in her first litter than others. We learn about cub survival as well, which again, a sow's first litter tends to have lower survival rates than her subsequent litter. She's still kind of learning how to be a successful adult female mom. And then causes of mortality as well is something that we learn. So vehicle collisions can be a cause of mortality, hunting can be a cause of mortality. Someone protecting their livestock from bears could be a cause of mortality. So we learn about that as well. This is a good example of these cubs were handled on the same day of the year. So we did one den in the morning, one den in the afternoon. And so these cubs in theory would be just about the same age. But this cub, it was just one cub and much smaller, was from a first-time mom. And these 2 cubs were from another sow, and she was a more mature mom. And so you can see those cubs are a lot more mature. They're very fluffy, larger. And then it was just this one cub that's a little bit smaller, a little bit scrawnier, but they're the same age. So it just shows that difference of maturity of mom. This is what I was talking about. Don't get too wrapped up in this. It's a little overwhelming. But this is what I was talking about in like a really cool application of our research, is that we can kind of give it to other partners and they can improve their work too and how it affects wildlife. So our GPS collars, like I was mentioning, the ones that have the ability to give us location information every 45 minutes, those are funded by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, MassDOT. And the reason for that is that we can give that information to MassDOT and they can account for it when they are doing improvements to roads to help minimize the impact of roadways on bears and other wildlife. So we actually had a student at one point use our data to determine how black bears typically move through the Massachusetts landscape and determine where they're most likely to walk and where on certain roads they're most likely to cross. And that's what this is that these like thicker lines, these thicker, heavier lines are more likely pathways, more likely walking pathways for bears, which is going to be the case for other wildlife too. If bears are choosing that walking pathway, chances are deer, whatever other wildlife will probably walk that way too, because it's probably the least cost path, or what we say, the easiest. It's the easiest to traverse, so they're going to do that. Really cool application. So now I want to show you some bear study data. So here we are. This is a good example of some developed areas and green areas. I know it's not super local to us. We don't have any bear data that I can show you from Westboro. So I'm just giving you another example. So to orient us, we got the Quabbin here. We got Amherst with UMass Amherst hanging in there. The Connecticut River, and then some pretty green areas, obviously the Quabbin, the Holyoke Range. Northampton is a very developed space. And this is the bear data overlaid with it. And so all of these little dots are like a location mark of where that bear was. And then these clusters are a given bear. So see here, this purple would be a bear with a collar on. This red would be a bear with a collar on. This yellow would be a bear with a collar on. You kind of get my drift here. And so you can imagine those almost as their home ranges. And this shows a few things. One, this shows how bears live and use residential areas, heavily developed areas all the time, living alongside people all the time with very little incident. They're just really good at taking advantage of the food that we have in our backyards, and so they're going to do that. Secondly, this tells us how many bears are in this area. This is a really densely populated space for black bears to be, especially in the last 10 plus years or so. Our bear population has really taken off in this space. Think of, so we're covering kind of everything here. This only accounts for the females we have collars on. So think of all the adult males that might be in this space. Think of all the cubs and yearlings that didn't have collars on there, and all the adult females that live there too that we didn't have collars on. So it's just a snippet. So you can imagine how many more bears are actually there. So this kind of gets us to living alongside bears. And our goal for our black bear population in Massachusetts is to have a healthy bear population that is using natural spaces to live and is using natural food sources and living as compatibly as possible with people. But We cannot do that without your help. And that's a lot of why we're here today, is that this is not something I can accomplish on my own. This isn't something our biologists can accomplish on our own. It is a community, a statewide effort. And so that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the program is what does it look like to coexist with bears? What does it look like to take proactive steps to live alongside them? And spoiler, it's not too hard. Really easy steps. So the reminder being that bears will take advantage of foods all year round. All year round. This is the root cause of bear conflict, is when we as people provide easy meals in our backyard, it attracts them to our backyard, and then it makes them comfortable around people and spend a lot of time in residential areas. That's when conflict occurs. So they'll take advantage of unsecured trash, bird feeders, year round. So biggest offender, bird feeders. So this was in Lincoln, Mass. So not as like people don't always think of black bears being in Lincoln. Yep. So they'll bend those shepherd hooks, no issue. Obviously, so this was taken in like the middle of the day. I don't think there's there is like an hour. I can't quite read it. I'll have to see. But you can tell it's pretty sunny. So sometimes people will be like, I'll take in my bird feeders at night. Don't worry, I take them in at night. Doesn't matter. I get pictures and videos of bears visiting bird feeders in full daylight. They will visit it. So, number one, a food attractant for bears to be around your yards. There's no safe time of year or day to have bird feeders out, even during the winter time, right? We talked about if bird feeders remain out, bears may choose to skip denning and just snack on your bird feeder all year round. Not ideal, not what we want. They drive conflict, they hurt bears, and there are better other ways to support your local songbirds. That's usually why people have bird feeders out, is they care about the birds. I care about the birds too. There's just other ways that we can do it. And I have a handout in the back that gives you some suggestions on just less harmful ways to help your birds that, again, don't harm other wildlife. And we're going to come back to this bear. And so let's remember her hanging out on someone's porch, snacking on a bird feeder. So, another big culprit. Bears at chicken coops. So this is like a wooden chicken coop. This bear did not successfully get into this chicken coop this time. It did successfully get into the chicken coop many months later after the person I spoke with didn't put up electric fencing yet. They just were waiting, and then they quickly put it up after we talked a second time. So backyard chickens have really taken off, especially post-pandemic. A lot of people, and I don't blame you, egg prices were crazy, especially then. And so people were having chickens, trying to be self-sufficient. But if you're going to have chickens, you got to have electric fencing to protect them from damage from bears. A standard chicken coop is not enough to keep a bear out. Remember, adult males can get 500 pounds plus. They can open these things no problem. And this bear did exactly that. I spared you from the picture of it getting into the chicken coop and walking away with a chicken, because it did, in fact, do that. And this is the same bear. And so let me tell you a little bit of a sad story about this bear. So she was actually the offspring of another adult female that we had collared. So we saw her as a cub. We saw her as a yearling. We then put a collar on her as a yearling, and she dispersed from her mom, went out on her own. But unfortunately, when she was with her mom, learning all the lessons about how to be an adult bear, people had bird feeders out in her home range. And so that mom was visiting bird feeders. And so she was teaching her cubs to visit bird feeders. And so when this yearling went off on her own, she immediately started visiting bird feeders. And we were getting pictures like this all the time in the Granby, South Hadley area. And it was starting to become a little bit of a concern. Then she very quickly moved on to chicken coops and started to becoming a frequent flyer at people's chicken coops, causing even more conflict, developing even more bold behavior, and some concern. Then we get a signal from her collar a little bit while later that we went out to see, you get a mortality signal when the collar hasn't moved, usually suggesting that the animal is dead, and we found her collar cut off and thrown in a river. So that was probably someone taking action to protect their chickens or other livestock because this bear was getting into it. And you may think, like, shame on that person. You might be thinking, poor on them. But technically, one is that can be legal under certain circumstances, and so we do provide a lot of advice for people who are having that type of conflict, and hopefully it doesn't come to that, but chances are that person took that action actually legally, they just didn't know they could. But I would put more of the blame on the people who had the bird feeders out to begin with. right? That's where it started. And so people say, I don't mind seeing the bears. They're harmless. I like seeing them. It's not harmless to the bear, right? That's how this ended, and that's just like one example. I could give you a million more. So I know it's like such a downer in this presentation, but this is a part of my job too, right? Is to tell you kind of the real situation, because like I can picture myself before I had this job being like, oh, I'd actually like to see a bear. I'd like to see that. But then if I saw that all the way through, I'd go, oh, I made a bad mistake. I don't want to do that. So if you have chickens, if you have any type of livestock in this area, even, maybe we're not seeing a ton of bears in Westboro yet, be proactive. Get that electric fencing out early. We have information about electric fencing in the back. We have a whole electric fencing guide at our page at mass.gov/bears for some suggestions on different designs that might work for you. Garbage, simple stuff. Store your garbage in a secure building like a shed or garage. Put it on the curb morning of pickup instead of the night before. Put it in a can instead of just in a bag. And there are like cool little trash caddies you can put your trash bins into if you don't have a shed or garage. And we have some designs for that online too, from a Boy Scout that suggested some of them. And people's classic questions just about, well, what do I do if I see a bear, right? What do I do? What if you see one in your yard, in your neighborhood? One will say their presence alone, not an immediate threat, right? They live alongside people. Bears and people live alongside each other successfully every day with little incidents, so not an immediate threat. You can let that bear move along, let it exit the area, and then what I want you to do once that bear's gone, I want you to step outside and go, okay, did I accidentally bring this bear into my yard? Is my trash secure? Is my compost enclosed? Do I have outdoor pet food hanging out that this bear snacked on? Backyard chickens, bird feeders, we've talked about it all. Again, they will eat pretty much anything we eat. So, secure those food sources. What do you do if you see a bear in a hike? One, I would say that's pretty cool, because I think that would be, I would say, a little bit more of a rare circumstance. Again, not immediate threat. Chances are a bear's gonna see, sort of. They don't have great eyesight, but they'll certainly smell and hear you before you probably even see them at all, and then they'll move on their way, right? They do tend to want to just keep a distance from us. But if you do see them, you want to keep your distance. Don't try and get super close to that bear, trying to get that perfect picture, right? Keep your pets leashed. Don't let your pet chase that bear. Keep them leashed. You don't need to run away. Just calmly leave the area. If it's like really noticing you and has a great interest to you, just say, hey bear, I'm here. I'm heading out. No worries. You do you. I'm going to go over this way. Again, nice and calm. You can just make it aware of your presence. Just calmly leave the area. We have a ton of resources online. I know I've gone over a lot of stuff today. So if you're feeling like you want to double back at any of these messages, you can go to our webpage, mass.gov/bears. We have lots of great materials there. Again, I have some in the back that you can use, but even more online, especially as you might prepare to like camp, say in Western Mass where there are more bears. If you're planning on camping, hiking out there, we got great tips for that too. So some final messages, right? The more time the bears spend around people, the greater chance of a negative encounter. So we as people have to take steps to not attract them to our backyards, because bears are never going to change. Bears are always going to be bears. Bears are always going to go for that easy, high-calorie meal. And if we're putting that in our backyard, then that's on us. So it's up to people to make the difference. It's not up to the bears. And that way, if we take those steps, if we secure our trash, and protect our backyard chickens, not attract bears to our backyard, we can reach that goal of bears mostly using natural spaces, utilizing natural food sources, and living compatibly among us here in Massachusetts. So this is the end of my presentation. Again, that website, if for any reason you need immediate help when it comes to a wildlife interaction, 24/7 dispatch line for the Massachusetts Environmental Police is a good resource, as well as really you want to contact your local officials for a quick response. But if it's during, I know I put the Northeast down here, I'll switch that to your local office's Central District office, which is in West Boylston. So if you need information Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., you want some advice from us, you could also call the headquarters where I'm at, and you'll probably just get routed to me, and we'll have a nice little chat about bears or other wildlife. So I always put this up at the end. We have a free monthly newsletter that goes to people's emails that has like 7 to 8 wildlife or fishing stories, articles, habitat management, just a general announcements from us. So if you haven't already subscribed to that, that's the QR code for it. Again, that's free monthly to your email. And then we have a neat wildlife magazine that comes out quarterly. Does anybody subscribe to that magazine here? I know that's what we had talked to Annie a little bit. There are some copies in the back that you are free to take, so you can get a little taste of it. And if you want more, you can get it delivered to your mailbox, like I said, 4 times a year. This is the cost for the subscription. It's $6 for 4 editions in a year. That's the QR code to more information. But I can leave this up, and maybe we can put the lights back up, and I'm happy to take a few questions together. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. I saw the hand just in the back there. Yeah, I'll take your question.
You mentioned compost, but you didn't mention any protection measures. Generally, compost for us is just going to be, there for a long time.
Yeah.
How do we protect that?
Yeah, so my first recommendation would be to enclose your compost rather than just having like an open pile, is to have some sort of enclosure around it. And then if you're seeing bears or other wildlife get into it, you could also opt for electric fencing to really prevent their access. Okay. But yeah, those are, I know, not great options, but those would be your options. Yeah. Yes?
Is there any way you can have bird feeders out for a certain part of the year and then not another in order to avoid conflict? I have a friend that has all kinds of bird feeders out. She loves birds, all kinds of different birds.
Yep.
But at a certain point, she takes them all in and then just does hummingbirds.
Yep.
For their season. Does that help at all or not at all?
So a good question that I get this question a lot,
Okay.
and I think, so it's asking about, like, is there any time of year that I could put a bird feeder out? And I get it, right? Because we love our birds, we want to help our birds, we love to just see our birds, right? Sometimes it's about us, and it's not about the wildlife, it's just about us and our love to see it. So I know that comes from a good place. So my answer would be no. There is no time of year or time of day that you putting a bird feeder out would cause no harm. And I'll paint a slightly different picture too, is, sometimes people are still just like so stuck on like, well, I'll only put it out in the winter, only during the day. Sure, you could categorize that as minimal conflict for bears, maybe. It's just like the most minimum that you can do. And we all have to make decisions, right? Like every day we're gonna make a decision about, what type of risk we're willing to take when it comes to our relationship with wildlife. So we're all making our own individual choices and weighing the pros and cons. But the other things I would measure is like, so here's another example of the harm of bird feeders, is that they provide a place for disease to spread. So has anybody heard of mange? Yeah, so mange is a skin disease that's caused by mites that go onto the skin. Wildlife commonly have mange. Things like coyotes and foxes are most reportedly with mange, but other things like raccoons and squirrels, even bears can get mange. Mange is spread by direct physical contact between healthy and sick individuals. So if you have a bird feeder out there that's dropping seed on the ground, you'll have foxes, you'll have coyotes, you'll have squirrels and chipmunks and raccoons visiting those bird feeders, all coming into contact with one another, all increasing the likelihood that that disease is going to spread and cause more effect on that local population. Same thing with turkeys will visit bird feeders. That causes them to become more aggressive, more bold toward people. So there's this like rippling effect of bird feeders. I'm not here to get on like my soapbox. There's more information about bird feeders in one of the article in the back that has a rabbit on the front. I wrote an article in there called Loving Wildlife to Death. And it's the steps people take that they think are helping wildlife but actually cause harm. There's some information there about bird feeders that go beyond just the bear context. But I appreciate the question. Hummingbirds tend to be less harmful. So again, as we're like working our way through like risk analysis, hummingbirds tend to be the least biggest offenders when it comes to causing like ripple effects for other wildlife. But it's not impossible for a bear to crack open a hummingbird feeder. We have seen it. But we always, like our bear project leader, he's admitted to having a hummingbird feeder. And so I feel like that gives us all a green light to try it. And then if you see a bear come to it, obviously take it down, right? But so minimal, we all have to make those decisions. I appreciate the question though. Yes, my friend.
We were wondering when they're eating the bees and wasp nests, if the bears get stung sometimes.
That's a great question. So wondering if the bears get stung when they go to eat bees, which they actually will visit people's hives as well, so that can occur. So not just like natural nests. Yeah, they do get stung, but the bears have really thick fur, And underneath that fur, they have really thick layers of fat. And so while they're getting stung a little bit, they can kind of tolerate it. Unless it's toward their nose, which is why electric fencing is effective, is because they bring their nose to it. That's where things get a little bit sensitive and uncomfortable, and they might go, ouch, okay, I'm out of here. But yeah, their body's kind of prepared, almost with a little bit of armor to handle that. Good question. Yes?
What's the estimation of the population of bears in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so asking about the population in Massachusetts of bears, not people, anywhere between 4,500 and 5,000 bears is where we believe we're at least 4,500 bears. So what we would describe as common and abundant, and we know again the population is growing in size and moving eastward as we see it. Yeah. Yes?
Do they make electrified bird feeders?
I don't think that would work out for any, I gotta think that birds would be affected by that too. I've seen a lot of things. So people will say like, oh, I've made my homemade contraption that keeps everything but this one type of bird out of there. Like, I don't know, I've seen some very persistent bears. So, again, yeah, other ways to support your local birds, planting native plants, you can have like bird baths and stuff out there as long as you're keeping them clean and just have it out during the warmer months, keeping them well maintained. Those have lower risk as well. Those are your better options. Yes, my friend in the back.
Me?
Yep, in green.
My son lives in rural Vermont,
Mm-hmm.
and he has black bears in his yard all the time.
Yeah.
And they're okay. I mean, he goes to get in the garage or whatever. But one day he was out there down on his hands and knees planting flowers, and his dogs started to bark furiously, and he turned around, and there was a bear standing about 6 feet away from him.
Yeah.
What was that bear gonna do?
I can't speak to exactly what that bear was going to do, but what I can say is sometimes like we surprise bears just as much as they surprise us. So we have had circumstances where we've had someone give us a call and they're like, I was outside gardening, and all of a sudden a bear just came around the corner and we were both like, poof, and then we kind of went our separate ways. And it's just the reality is like sometimes we can surprise the bear too if they had a bit of a blind spot. So that can be what often occurs. What I can say is black bears, we're very lucky to have just that one type of bear here in Massachusetts. They are described as like pretty shy, very chill. You compare them to things like polar bears or grizzlies that do have that little bit more of a tendency to be a bit more intense or aggressive. Black bears do not have that type of reputation at all. They do generally want to keep to themselves, keep space. Their behavior is really only going to change based on our decisions, our behavior. Unfortunately, we do have people who attempt to hand feed black bears here in the state. Obviously, we all know that's a terrible idea, but people choose to do it for any given reason. And so obviously that might change a bear's decision. They might approach a person because at one point they got a meal from a person. Not good for the bear, not good for people. So please never intentionally feed wildlife either. We didn't go too much into that. Usually people are accidentally doing it, but some people do intentionally feed. If you're aware of that happening in your community, contact your local police department or your local board of health. They can sometimes assist with getting that message across. Yes?
On the planet, there's about 15 acres, nice big pasture, really big gardens, like lots of fruit trees, blueberries, raspberries, compost, bird feeders.
Yeah.
That's like quite a bit of space. How do you kind of protect that space from bears?
Yeah, I'll say it's going to be a challenge, right? Is that especially if you just have these naturally occurring, like we'll see bears visit fruit trees and it is a bit of you take steps to try to minimize damage, but you kind of come to expect damage. If you have a lot of property and bear damage is a concern, we often recommend for like agricultural folks, farmers, is to open their property to bear hunting for the legal regulated season to help kind of control some of that within that season, and people can harvest that animal and utilize that natural resource. So that can be an option for some people. Or you can just electric fence smaller areas that are receiving like exceptional damage, try and pick up any fruit that's hit the ground. Again, just like trying to do what you can to minimize the food. But obviously things like bird feeders, if they're out there, that's something you can take down. But when it comes to agricultural crops, it can certainly be a challenge.
One more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you eat bear?
People do. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I have not myself, but people do all the time. Yeah, that's a major reason for why people harvest bears is for consumption. Yeah. My friend in green in the back. Sorry. Go ahead. Yep, you got it.
Yeah, I was wondering if a bear is like a repeat offender and it doesn't get harvested or somebody doesn't take care of it on their own, does Fish and Wildlife come in and take the bear out or relocate it or?
No. So we do not relocate bears. Generally, we do not relocate wildlife for a whole host of reasons, and it's not actually not legal for like the general public to relocate wildlife either. I always like to give that little plug to relocate wildlife off your property. But no, we don't come out and like pick up a, what someone might describe a problem bear and move it somewhere else to be a problem for someone else. We tell people to take steps to help that bear relearn how to keep a distance from people. Obviously, if it gets to a point where we really truly believe that there's a human health and safety threat, then we'll be having an ongoing conversation with the local police department and making a decision alongside the Massachusetts Environmental Police. But it almost never comes to that. It's more like, hey, the reason why it's around is because it's eating everybody's backyard chickens. So let's get some electric fencing up. The bear will get a couple zaps. It'll realize it's not going to get a meal anymore, and it can kind of reset. But we don't generally relocate. You might hear things on the news of like if a bear got into downtown Northampton up in a tree, and yeah, it might get immobilized there and just move to a nearby green space. Those are really unique circumstances where like the bear might have wandered into a really downtown place in the middle of the night when no one was there. The sun rose, people started coming out, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm stuck, and it goes up a tree or something. And now that's more like a human health and safety threat because now the bear has no easy exit without encountering people. And people tend to gather at those things. It just makes things tricky. And so we monitor those. We try other options before we reach like making the decision to immobilize and move. But even in those circumstances, we're not moving them to like a forest many miles away. We're moving them to a local near green space that's within their home range. That's kind of our approach. Yes?
Okay, so you're talking about bird feeders and fruit trees.
Yeah.
A lot of people have vegetable gardens.
Yeah.
And surrounded by a fence to keep deer out.
Yeah.
But are bears going to go after vegetable gardens?
I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I'll say I've never gotten a report of someone saying specifically like a little small vegetable plot that they're going for that. More on like a really big scale of like apple orchards and cornfields, that's where a lot of damage can occur. I do receive a lot of calls about bears, and I can't say I've ever received one that's like significant bear damage to a garden. Usually woodchucks are the number one offender when it comes. I think we can all agree with that. So that's, again, but if you are seeing damage, if you're seeing visit from a bear, say, then taking those steps to electrify would be the recommendation. But yeah, nothing crazy. Yes, thank you for your patience.
Sure, yeah, so kind of on top of that, then what about people who keep bees?
Yeah.
Isn't that sort of, I know you can't remove them as easily, but isn't that all kind of the same? You're electing to keep the bees, and that's essentially
Yeah, they can bring bears in, they do, and we would say electric fencing that as well. So in our electric fencing guide, we have recommendations both for chicken coops and for apiaries. And so even just this past year, because we've been getting more reports of hive damage from bears this year, I think it's because there's a lot of new beekeepers too, and so like they didn't get our last wave of presentation, so it's like we're re-educating this generation. And so I think we talked to like somewhere close to 300, 400 beekeepers in like a 2-month span where we did a bunch of presentations for the county groups to try and encourage them to electrify. So again, we have resources for that, and yes, that certainly can be a draw for bears to come into those areas.
And I guess the birds are just doomed in the cold winter.
So
right? Like that's someone told me that they die if they don't get enough food.
Well, of course, if there's not enough food.
But like in the winters when it was so cold, in January and stuff, that's just kind of a tough situation.
So I would say like a good reminder is that wildlife that's found in Massachusetts is capable of living in Massachusetts. Wildlife that's found in Massachusetts during the wintertime is capable of withstanding Massachusetts winters. That's what they're built for. So even for us, like I feel like we have this short-term memory that like this is the coldest winter, the snowiest winter, and it's absolutely been brutal. But that's how Massachusetts can be. It's just we've had mild winters recently, but there's been really cold winters in the past and heavy snow. So wildlife that's here in the winter is capable of surviving Massachusetts winters. They've had a long time of having these adaptations. I won't tell you that no birds die in the winter. There is winter mortality when it comes to wildlife, and that's just sort of a natural part of being a wild animal. So there is research that shows you that bird feeders do help songbirds survive winter and help with their like increase in success in reproduction, but then I would say there's this much heavier side of the harm that they do. And so we're always in this little bit of a balance. So I won't lie and say, oh no, they'll all be perfectly fine, because it's
I wouldn't believe you anyway.
yeah, so there's certainly some mortality, but I think the costs outweigh the benefits. And yeah, just a good reminder that those jays, those cardinals you might be seeing around, they can handle it. They're doing okay.
Lose that adaptation even as the climate changes.
Exactly, not in this short period of time, right?
Okay.
We've seen like bird behavior shift with a little bit of climate change. There's some interesting research there, but their bodies are still capable of handling these winters. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, so I have two questions.
Sure.
One is about that bird feed, like the hot bird feed that mammals don't like, so like chickens, squirrels.
Is it like spicy? Is that what you mean by hot?
Is that like deterrent at all for bears, or are they still gonna eat it?
I'd say they'd still eat it. I'm sure there's some bear out there that would prove me wrong. Yeah, that's what I mean. So like, I equate that to some people who be like, oh, I sprinkle cayenne pepper around my garden, and I wouldn't say that's overly successful either. So I never encourage people to purchase things like that, because like you might have really short-term success and you might just end up like spending a lot of money on something that doesn't actually do anything long-term. So I would say no, it's probably not a good alternative.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And my other question was, you said about the average age of like female bear reproduction dropping from 4 years to 3 years. Is that just because they're more abundant and they're sort of doing better? Like why is that?
Yeah, it's thought to be connected to actually like resource availability. So again, if we have people have a ton of food in our backyards, then younger bears are gonna like build up, like they're gonna build up their like reserves and grow a lot more in their younger life, which makes them reproductive earlier in life. And so they reach that like sexual maturity just a little bit earlier because of the foods provided. So we see bears in suburban, more developed areas living around people, reproducing earlier because of the foods that they're finding. Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting point. I don't always have time to get into that in the presentation, so thanks for bringing it back up. Yes.
Lifespan of a female bear compared to a male bear, or are they both the same?
Yeah, so we say it's usually 10 years or younger for adult bears, but it's not uncommon to have bears reach their teens. We see that in our study that we have bears reach their teens. And think again, if it's a female, she's reproducing every other year starting as early as age 3. So high reproductive potential, but they can live up to 30 years. That is possible. But not common, right? There's a lot of threats when you're just a wild animal doing your own thing. So on average, 10 years or less. But I thought I saw, hand there.
Have you done any like genetic diversity studies of the bears? Are they all from that small population, or have they been interacting with them?
That's a great. I'm not aware of any research that looked into like the gene pool. There's a lot of flow of bears. So we know bears, like Connecticut has a growing bear population as well, and we know some of their bears leach over to us. And same thing with the northern states too, is that there's a lot of migration coming in and out. So it's not like we're like this island where all the bears in Massachusetts all are like, related to those very few that were out in the Berkshires. So I would guess that we have good genetic diversity. It kind of reminds me though, what's interesting is that often when you have females, so say like an adult female has her cubs and some of them are females and they get ready to disperse, those females don't tend to go very far, and sometimes they'll even tolerate having like overlapping territories, and so you'll get this like layering effect of like great grandma, mom, kid, all just kind of real close to one another. So you could have really related individuals kind of close by. Yeah. Yes?
I live right near a hiking trail in the woods, and
Thanks
see
for
a lot of people hiking with their dogs off leash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good. Are there any reports or data on dogs, especially, or animals that are pets, that are attacked by bears and whatnot?
Yeah, so asking about pet and bear interactions, say like in the woods, off leash, or in backyards, absolutely, it does occur. I would say it happens yearly, is that bears and dogs will have interactions. It's almost always when the animal's off leash, not directly supervised in the yard. More often than not, it's the bear or the dog chasing the bear, and the bear feels like it needs to defend itself, and so it will give the dog a swat. Or, you know, the dog chases the bear climbs up a tree like it's very good at doing, and then now you've just like treed this bear and made it really anxious and uncomfortable, and, you know, whatever might result. So that certainly does occur, and that's why we encourage people to leash their pets when they're out on hikes so that they don't have these unexpected interactions with wildlife or chase wildlife in that way, certainly. And then we tell people to directly supervise their pets when they're outside. And if your pet were to get into like some sort of altercation with the bear, you know, trying to do what you can to safely break up that altercation, but don't put yourself in between. I know that's like a no-brainer, but people certainly do that, and that's where like bears and people have actually had contact, is usually someone trying to save their dog from an interaction. So you can make a lot of loud sounds, you can throw things in their direction, but in the end you want to make sure that you're keeping yourself safe as a number one priority. But yes?
Maybe as a last question.
Yeah, sure.
The picture you sent was of you holding some cubs.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that experience?
Sure. So that was my first winter with Mass Wildlife. So I've been with Mass Wildlife for 3 years, and that was my first winter going out to our dens. That was a den out in western Massachusetts with a really mature sow, and so we knew she was going to have cubs that season. That den was actually in a big brush pile in someone's backyard, so we had to go like knock on their door, be like, hey, can we go back there? They were all for it, and we always, like, if we're on someone's property, we always invite them to join us once the scene is safe and the cubs are out and the data is collected. So that cub happened to have 4 cubs, or that sow happened to have 4 cubs, which is like that upper range. One of them was a lot smaller than the other 3, so you could kind of see the effect of trying to care for 4 cubs. That sow is producing milk, and those cubs are reliant on that milk, while that sow is not eating, drinking, or really going to the bathroom. So she's fully relying on those fat reserves that she built up in summer and fall to not only like provide nutrition to herself, but produce the milk that then provides nutrition to her cubs. And she won't eat again until like April. It's pretty wild. Yeah, pretty crazy. But yes, so I know we might be tight on time. So what I'll do is I'll wrap up, and I'm happy to stick around for any questions that people may have. As long as that collar made it somewhere on that back table, love it. And then I do have a real bear skull up here if anybody wants to take a look at that. See its omnivorous teeth of nice pointy canines, but flat molars, and just get a closer look. So, but thank you all for coming out. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. Yes.